Hello, everyone. I am Chet Hendrickson, and we have a lovely panel here today to discuss the future of software development. And so let me kind of give you a quick little introduction to everyone. Somewhere around me on the screen, you will see Lisa Crispin, who is a well-known member of the Agile community, specializing in testing and all around great stuff. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us. Also, I believe a world's leading expert on donkeys. Is that true?
That is true, absolutely. I thought about having one join me today, but it seemed like a little more sophisticated conference, so I restrained myself.
No. We're right at the wild animal stage. Also joining us is Ken Pugh, who is a well-known member of the Agile community, a technology expert, author of several books about test-driven development, a thought leader in the real sense of the word. Thank you, Ken, for joining us. Also, we have Woody Zuhl, who is one of the leading proponents of some of the new ideas that are breaking into the world of Agile, mostly asking the question of what would happen if all of us just worked together. What an incredible insight. And what would happen if people stopped asking us when we'd be done and just kind of watched what we were doing. Both incredibly brilliant ideas, I think. We also have Llewellyn Falco, another great coach in the Agile space and a great leader in the new ideas coming out of the third or the second and third waves of Agile folks. And lastly, we have Chris Lucian, who I really don't know that I know, but I believe he is a manager and technologist out at Hunter Industries, a place that has been experimenting with some of these ideas and is kind of starting the second wave of what it means to really be Agile.
Got a great podcast too.
What was that?
He's got a great podcast too.
He has a great podcast too. Well, I'm old and I don't listen to podcasts. I just sit and listen to my records on my turntable and dream of the good old days. So we're not as good as we thought. So anyway, our subject today is the future of software development. And I'd like to, first of all, reflect on the fact that we're really not very good at predicting the future. Back when I was with Hugo and David in New York around March, April, we were predicting that we'd all be together in Portugal because things were going to all be nice and the world would heal itself and we could get together in Lisbon. And here I am in my basement.
I mean, basically everybody who was asked, where will you be in 5 years in 2015, got it wrong.
Yes. And so apparently Llewellyn has stolen my question, which was I intended to start by asking Ken, where did you think we would be in software development? I'll let you subtract out the COVID stuff, but where do you think we would be in software development 10 years ago, in 2010?
Well, boy, that's a long time ago. I was thinking about it back in 2015. They were making all the waves about how we would have autonomous vehicles by 2020. Okay? And it was like, I was planning on buying one this year. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen. I'd say that is probably the biggest thing, is that we had ideas back then that just still are this much farther from actually in operation.
Do you want to just go around or?
Just speak up.
Yeah, I thought we'd be refactoring legacy .NET apps, and we'd be mired.
And aren't we doing that?
Yeah, a little bit, but so it's funny. I think you alluded to not estimating projects and things like that. So 10 years ago was a year after I think I had stopped doing estimates. And so it's been 11 years now since I've had to give a software estimate. And so this is a pretty interesting thing. So I don't know if I could have told you that back then that I wouldn't be doing that, but so I did. I think that is a interesting contrast from now till then. I think that the idea of doing pure Kanban and rather than estimating work has grown. I've done this practice across 2 organizations now over the last 11 years. And so I think that was one thing that I think is surprising, is that I'm still not doing them. And none of my teams are as well. And we're all the better for it. So I think that's an idea that has developed dramatically over time. I also, back then I couldn't have told you that we'd be mob programming either. And so, because even at that point, mob programming hadn't really been invented yet. And so, I would have still assumed that we'd be working alone and isolated as we had been in the past and communicating very infrequently. But instead we have these high frequency communication networks that happen. So those are 2 things that are just like really obvious to me, I guess, in this, and I can I'll pass it on or to let it go around.
So Lisa, where did you think we would be 10 years ago?
Well, and 10 years ago, I was fortunate to be working on a team that had been together 7 years and achieved the unicorn magic of becoming competent at the XP practices and succeeding with a whole team approach to building quality in, to doing continuous delivery. We had finally learned to call it that because Jez Humble and David Farley's book had come out. We're like, oh, that's what it's called. But at the same time, when I went to conferences and talked to people, I was starting to realize that for whatever reason, test-driven development was not going to take over the world, which was puzzling. And but I did hope more teams would see the value, understand that there's a lot more to testing, and we can have a lot of value in things like exploratory testing, security testing, performance, whatever. That's something the whole team needed to value, and that actually I think has happened. So I'm happy about that. But I do wish I'd see more of this whole team approach to everybody engaged in testing, everybody really focused on building quality in, because that's how we get to continuous delivery. But change is slow.
Yeah. So Llewellyn, where do you think the world is different than we thought it would be?
So, I mean, I agree with Ken a lot, and like some of the technologies I thought were going to really take off. So self-driving cars I was hoping to own by now. Even going in my car more often was something I was kind of expecting. I forgot how to put gas
they've been promising me flying cars since I was about 10 years old, which is now a half a century ago, and I still look out the window and all I see is birds.
VR and augmented reality I thought would be more dominant than it is right now. Although ironically, I am also surprised at, I guess pandemic has really helped this, but the amount of virtual collaboration is higher than I thought it would have been. Mm-hmm. I thought that we were going to see more of a shift towards in-person. And in fact, you have 3 people here have done quite a lot of mobbing in the world. And I don't think we had done less than 10 virtual mobs in 2019. And so there's been a learning curve that's really been accelerated in that respect. And I'm not sure if we would have gotten there without something this big. I think a lot of times with transformations in general, because part of what your question is like, I'm surprised at the things I was hoping was going to come that came, but I'm also surprised at how many things have stayed the same from 10 years ago that are, So yes, we are still refactoring .NET applications. We are still refactoring C++ applications. Like there are still a lot of things that just go slowly. And I feel like this has sort of helped push a lot of us, including myself, to try new things. And so I was surprised by the cars. I was surprised by lack of augmented reality. I'm surprised also by machine learning, like it is more prevalent but it is also more in the background. I was expecting it to be much more in the foreground of what we do.
It didn't take our jobs yet.
Hasn't taken our jobs yet. Yeah, and there's a lot of jobs I still want to give it.
Jobs, they don't want him. I don't know. Woody, could you have imagined virtual mob programming 10 years ago?
Well, first of all, I'm really bad at predicting the future. But I will say a couple things first leading up to this. This is a mouse. When the mouse first became easily available, which had been, 30 or more years ago, and my older brother, who was a computer programmer, still is involved in that kind of stuff, he asked me, what do you think of this? Is that going to be big? I said, nobody's going to use a mouse. You don't want to take your hands off the keyboard. It's just not going to be something. I was wrong. He came to me a few years later and said, this internet stuff, what do you think of this? I said, well, that's for universities. No, nobody's going to use that. So, asking me about, so what did I think 10 years ago? Those experiences taught me that I'm usually wrong. And I started changing how I look at things. And the thing was, let's say 10 years ago exactly, was just before I joined the team where we originated the idea of mob programming. I had grown to the point where I understood that the organizations themselves hadn't changed. In the over 10 years, closer to 20 years that I had worked with companies doing software development, they weren't changing. Even though Agile had come on and there were lots of new ways to look at things, the old ways were still prevalent. And here we are 10 years later, and I think in most ways, what I'm calling those old ways are still prevalent. A lot of people take what they call Agile and then just wrap it around those ways that we were doing things. So if I look forward now, I'm not expecting to see great changes happen, but there's the law that what we overestimate will happen in the next 5 years and underestimate what will happen in the next 10 years. Yeah, I should buy that. Just say I'm looking forward to being surprised, and I'm really hoping that we will learn to be much more collaborative. And the unfortunate pandemic situation has driven that collaboration really quickly forward, because a lot of teams I've been working with would never have really collaborated when they were sitting together. And now that they're forced to work apart, they're actually collaborating a lot more. It's kind of strange. Has anyone else noticed that?
I've noticed that people they're just lonelier. And so they're happier to get more collaboration.
That's exactly it. I think I've seen that over and over again, where the people are much more accepting of remote mob programming because they get to talk to somebody for 8 hours where they would otherwise be isolated.
Where I work is definitely not a culture of pairing or mobbing, and we've been able to introduce a lot more of that now as people are more receptive to it, and we're calling it ensemble testing and programming now because it's a nicer, kinder term, as Chris knows. But people are really, and when they do it, like we had a session yesterday that was something like a bug bash type session, and the developers at the end were like, oh, I really like this ensemble thing, and we should do this more. And so just being able to get that thin edge of the wedge in there, maybe that's going to help.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ken.
I've noticed, with these collaboration tools like Mural and Miro, because anybody can put things up and they can put a Post-it note up. Well, the introverts can actually are more likely to start interacting, because it's like, let me just put it up. And you don't have to worry about handwriting, okay? Like, who put that up? What did it say? And so forth. So you have that. And then I've just been off a few sessions where, truly you're doing your pair or actually triple programming. Now that we have the technology, you can share your Visual Studio or your Eclipse over multiple people at once. Now you don't even have to worry about, changing the keyboard, if you will. And we now have the technology to truly become much more collaborative than you could in physicality.
I mean, you say now we have the technology, but I don't think it's the technology so much. I think it's like we've now actually practiced and learned how to do it.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the tools were sort of there all along, and it took us understanding why we needed them and why we wanted to have them. You know, I remember 30 years ago, or probably 25 years ago, I guess, that Alistair Coburn said that the highest bandwidth communication was two people and a whiteboard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now those two people can be on different sides of the planet and sharing a whiteboard, a Miro, or a Mural, or some other tool. And it changes how we're able to interact with people, and that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, I often will, when I'm working with a team directly, will point out that the whiteboard is where it's like having a temporary memory location that the whole team is sharing. So we're sharing it across brains. We can turn to it. We can point out. We can move things around. And this gives us a way to expand not just our sharing of our ideas, but the permanence of that. So when we're talking, when I'm done with a sentence, that just kind of fades away. But when we write it down, just put a little card up on the board, we now have a placeholder to continue that conversation as we go on. And so I think the tools, the online, Mural type applications are a shadow of that. They do give us a chunk of that. I don't think that we're sophisticated in using them yet, but I believe they're at least a good step in that direction.
But you don't have to put up a do not erase on there.
That's true. That's true.
That's such a good point, though. I hadn't really thought about that. I've been using, like, even Google Jamboard. It's not very sophisticated, but it works. And I hadn't really thought about the particular advantages of that. That's really cool.
Well, one of the things we learned long ago was to keep a little piece of paper, a little pad next to yourself. And so that when you're coding and you had some idea, you didn't have to stop what you're doing and go do that. You could write it down on the piece of paper, and the paper would remember it for you.
Yep.
And now, a mob situation, particularly a distributed situation, having that sort of a shared pad becomes important.
Super important. Also, though, we're using combinations of tools, right? Like even here, right? Like normally all the messages would be going through chat, but now we're using Slack because like that combination with the video works good. Often we're using like a shared Google Doc or like a shared mind map when we're doing a thing. When we've done groups that are more open, we've like streamed them on Twitch, and we get comments from people who are watching. We're finding combinations in the same way as like the whiteboard was another tool that we dragged in next to the computer, right? Like we were altering our environment there, but often when we went online, we weren't altering our environment. We just used whatever the box was. And I think we're now starting to figure out like how do we alter that to make it something that's helpful.
You're reminding me of something. What's that, Chris?
It's the tooling cocktail. So it's like, we have like the mobbers. So like when I see remote mobbers, they're the guys in Germany and they use the mob tool. And, I think we use AnyDesk, for example, but like the way that we transition code is completely different. And so it's fascinating to see the remote work environments that people have and how vastly different they can be. Like one is sharing a server to, and everybody's looking at that server, and the other one is the code is moving from computer to computer with IDE to IDE. So they couldn't be more different. It's fascinating. So I started referring to that as the remote tool cocktail.
Well, when I first started trying to pair remotely back 20-some years ago, when all we had was VNC, and on good days it was sort of all right, and on bad days you just would rather get in your car and drive 300 miles. What kinds of tools are you seeing out there that folks in the audience should be trying, and knowing that in a year from now they'll be much better because of the stress that we're all putting on them? But where do you think, what kind of tools are worth giving a try to?
I mean, I'll start throwing them out. But so I actually used VNC recently through an SSH tunnel to a virtual machine running Linux that was hosted out in Europe. And it worked great. All of us could jump in. The everybody going to a remote server, I'm seeing a lot more because bandwidth on most people's houses is asynchronous. So one person serving everything from their house is usually really hard. But if you serve everything from like an EC2 server or a physical server just hosted somewhere, I'm finding that paradigm working really well. Mob is a tool that basically just allows you to automate checking into a temporary Git branch a lot. Google Docs, Google Jamboard. I love Jamboard as a whiteboard because the shared app on your phone, it's just very responsive, right? Like, so you can draw and animate, and it's actually really nice. Google Doc, just literally a Google Doc somewhere. But also, I've seen things like in Teams where you can look at your different teams. Like, Chris, you have a lot of teams that are managing teams, right?
Yeah. So
you
Microsoft
have this
Teams.
thing where people show up, like randomly.
It's so in Microsoft Teams, it's really cool. It's like I feel like this is like maybe a key benefit that I think Zoom should find a way to copy. But this idea that you can have channels, right? And in each of those channels, you can have an ongoing video call that anybody can move in and out of as long as they have access to that channel. So like essentially as a director with many people that are there, a lot of people are like, where's the accountability for remoting and all that sort of stuff? And like, first of all, mobbing is, accountable in and of itself because you have to collude with 4 people to do anything negative, right?
Hard to do that.
Yeah. But, on top of that, right, in Teams, there's a little camera icon saying like, hey, there's a video chat in this thing. And so each mob, like, if there's a single project with 3 mobs on it, and it would be mob 1, mob 2, mob 3, each one would have a camera on it. If you click on it, it shows all the people in there, and it has an ongoing chat history for that group. And you can hit join and then just drop in or pull out at any time. And so anybody can go and talk to the mob as if they were just walking up to them. And so one of my biggest fears, I think, from going from the office to remote was like just this idea of like walking around the office and talking to people. And I've still been able to maintain that because I can just kind of go from team to team. And it's a really fantastic feature.
Zoom has just enabled you to set it up so that you can set up breakout rooms and people can freely move between the breakout rooms.
Oh, yeah. Is that like a setting or download? I've been wanting that for so long.
Yeah.
I haven't even had a chance to try it, but it's such a great idea.
Yeah.
But the other, I like, the simple tools like Google Docs or Google Jamboard. I love Jamboard because you can write on it as well as the sticky notes. People are really receptive to it. But I've learned from other teammates really simple things for like brainstorming. Like you can just take Google Slides, don't put it in presentation mode, just have a slide. You can pre-create a bunch of virtual sticky notes, and then you can just have people start writing on them and start affinity mapping them and stuff and all work together on them. It's so, I know you can do that with Miro or Mural, whatever, but this is so simple. There's no bar to learning it. So I just love those kind of ideas.
Have something where the cost of admission is small enough that you don't have to have another login. You don't have to remember another thing, and all that. So having something that's close by and easy to use is sometimes overcomes maybe a little bit less sophistication. A piece of butcher paper on the wall goes a long way when the electricity's off, especially. Yeah, Ken.
So I got a question for everybody who's using this. I've noticed that in many cases, because I've been using MS Teams a lot, is people tend to not show their video. And it's almost like you're on a conference call. And I found that like 50% of the communication is being able to see people. If I couldn't see your faces, I might keep interrupting you, or there'd be pauses in the whole words. And so, I'm wondering, we're now at the point we can do all this cool stuff, but people retreat to their initials.
Most people I work with do want to show their video, but some people, they were all of a sudden we're all working from home in Lisbon. My team's in Lisbon, and some of them don't have great bandwidth, or there are other people in their household also using up the bandwidth, or other people in their apartment building. So they just don't have the bandwidth to run the Zoom. And sometimes they don't want to show their dirty kitchen.
Well,
And when I do remote workshops and stuff, I'm sensitive to that. It's like, please turn your camera on if you're comfortable doing that, but if you're not comfortable or you don't have the bandwidth, I understand. And it's too bad because, as you say, it cuts out a lot of communication. But I try to use, the lo-fi tools like Jamboards and stuff to have people do a check-in, like use an emoji and show how you're feeling or things like that. So there are other ways that you can kind of get people engaged in a lo-fi way.
I think I've noticed a pattern actually around this. It's actually that I think from team to team, I have like many different size teams. And so what I've noticed is that only about 3 or 4 people have their cameras on in any meeting. And so like what I've noticed is the teams that have only 3 people on them and the teams that have 13 people on them, there's only ever about 3 cameras on. And so I think it's actually the number of people and also probably like ratio to introvertedness. And so there's obviously the bandwidth issue. And what I tell people is communicate at the highest level of bandwidth you can. But I actually think that there's like a maximum comfort level that people typically have with the number of people that have cameras on and whether or not they'll turn on their camera. And it's fairly consistent, actually, from what I've
seen it with a percentage, right? Yeah. So like with teams, like because we've been doing classes and stuff with like 10, 15 people. And once you get sort of like 8 of them turning it on, there's this sort of avalanche where it goes to, oh yeah, no, this is the thing we are doing is we're using video.
Yeah.
And so people want to sort of fit in.
This is work invading your home, not your home invading work. And what happens there is what happens in your home. And yeah, we stuck in through the window and whatever happens, happens. My favorite thing is Michelle Schleiger, who some of you know, I'm sure, plays a game at her trainings called Cat Butt, which is a Scrum training drinking game. So when a cat butt shows up on the screen, so you go cat butt and everybody drinks. Now what they drink, I'm not sure.
I just had a cat in my lap. I wish I'd have known that.
Yeah, well, I have 2 walking around, and I'm surprised I don't have one on the screen right now. Well, we've been talking a lot here, and it's probably time to look at maybe the future a little bit. So that's what this is about. So what would you like to see in the next 5 or 10 years? Not a prediction, but just what if you could write a something and throw it into a bottle for the gods to pick up and think about, what would it be?
So I would like to see test first adopted universally. Okay. Writing the test before you write the code because it tests the requirements. And whether we do BDD, TDD, or whatever you want to call it, come on, let's write the test first. We still need exploratory. You still need some of the stuff at the end. But I don't know why people aren't just doing that. I mean, the only way to get to DevOps to get things out quickly.
There are a lot of reasons. There was an interesting panel discussion from the Cucumber people organized a couple months ago. But there are lots of reasons. But I mean, I share that same desire, although skeptical whether it'll happen. But I also share the desire of I would sure like to see a whole lot of mobbing or ensembling or whatever you want to call it, because it just solves so many of the problems. It's like gets you the whole team approach to quality and DevOps and continuous delivery. It gets you everything. So if only
like, if you look at the 5 dysfunctions of a team, almost all of them are impossible in an ensemble. Like you just, yeah.
You just can't do that. You just can't do that.
Yeah. Like,
you're all sitting around the table.
Like how do you optimize individual work when we're always working together?
Yeah.
So
I feel like you're being left out. So jump in here.
So what I want to see is very high level, very capable collaborators. So what I believe with software development is that all the work that we've done since I first started doing software development, I'm going to guess before that from people I've talked to, so I've been programming for 40 years, is done in some form of collaboration, unless we're writing that software for ourselves and we're then just collaborating for ourselves. If I'm the only one who's going to use it and I'm the only one who needs to think about it, then I really don't need to communicate with others about it necessarily. But for most of what we do in our companies, we are collaborating. We're just doing it in highly ineffective manners. So what do I want to see in the future And this is the same thing I would have said in 1999 or, 2010. I would have said, I want to see the future with better collaboration. Everything gets better. I will just say one little thing. In 1999, I worked at a place where I was one of the last 3 of 200 developers that were hired. And they ran out of cubicles to put people in. So they put us, last little bunch, 6 people, into a single room, which we called the Death Star. You can understand from that time period, called the Death Star. And this was a mob, although we each had our individual computers. And this is where I got my original saying, and we need to find a way to do this remotely. If you can't smell your teammates, you're not on a team. And so this was something I advised people for the next 10, 15 years. I kept telling that. I said, you say you're on a team, but one person's on that floor, one person's on that floor, and you're not on a team.
Oh.
So what's the virtual equivalent of that, Woody? You need a new saying.
Yeah, so this is something I'll work on. And, but I do think, smell-o-vision was promised, and we never got it. So I don't know. But there you go. What do I want to see in the future is better collaboration, as full as possible. Let's discover the next level. Whatever we're at now, there's a next level. Let's step in that direction.
Maybe it's if you haven't seen all your teammates' messy house, you're not on a team.
If you haven't seen the cat butt.
If you haven't seen a cat butt.
My messy house is here.
You have beautiful artwork behind you, though, Woody.
Oh, yeah. I love to have those things around.
And Ken has a beautiful quilt behind him. Is that a real quilt or a background?
Actually, it's a real thing from Boulder, Colorado. Yeah.
Gorgeous.
I want to hear from others, too, yeah.
Chris.
Yeah. 10 years ago, I think I was maybe struggling with this, and I tell the story a lot of, I was hired, or I was promoted to a management role 10 years ago at the same time somebody else was, and then I had a really strong friendship with this person, and over the course of a few months, the person that we reported to, our boss, was basically comparing us to each other all the time. And to the point where the level of animosity grew to where this person was just like, not treating me well, to a certain extent, but like, I think it was like just the behavior of it, right? And so like, it was like the antithesis of psychological safety. It's like, oh, hey, that team's doing really well. What's your team doing about it? And then, the people that are not doing well are flipping each other the bird in the hallway and stuff like that. So, I think I want now what I wanted back then, which is ubiquitous psychological safety and just the ability to collaborate with people, to give constructive feedback with people, and not fear reprisal from other people. And I think that the keynote today was a big part of that, distributed network decision making over hierarchical systems and things like that. But I think that if people can just treat each other well and respond well to feedback and give feedback often, then we, regardless of what practices we're using, I think we'll be in a much better place than we are now. So, yeah, that's mine.
Man, that should be the summation of this, shouldn't it? It's really, the technology is going to change in ways we cannot imagine. I have, Raspberry Pis back here someplace that I run IBM MVS on just because I'm a crazy old man. And who half of you don't even know what that means. I got MVS running on a Raspberry Pi.
I love it.
And when I think about what I would like the world to be able to feel is, I think back to being back at Chrysler with my old buddy Rich Garzaniti, and he would be writing small talk using TDD, pairing with one of us typing and the other working the mouse.
Nice.
And if you're not
okay, gentlemen,
you don't even know what that means, really.
Gentlemen, ladies, can I have your attention for a second? So we're getting down to the last couple.
I got one question for you. And the Agile Manifesto, written in 2001, announced a change which not only changed software development, but also changed management and changed leadership and changed how companies think. And in fact, if we look at those top companies today, like Facebook or Amazon or Google, these companies were either software engineers or they were electrical engineers who founded the companies. So now we're almost 20 years later. Software development and company leadership doesn't always see eye to eye. So what do you think company leaders, as they head towards 21st century management, what do they have to learn from developers today?
I can't repeat it all, but I think that the section on transformative leadership and culture that's required to help teams become high performing in the book Accelerate by Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jess Humble and Gene Kim, I think that really sums it up well, and I highly recommend everybody go get that book and see what leaders should be doing, and I see very few leaders doing this myself.
I will reiterate, read all of the psychological safety material out there from Amy Edmondson and implement it, understand it, and as a leader, regularly ask for feedback from your team and act on it.
I'd say listen to your experts, listen to your people. They have great ideas. Don't think that you're the only one that has ideas.
I'd say like developer happiness is underrated. Right? Like there's a lot of companies that have sort of stumbled onto success simply by really paying attention to developer happiness. And I mean, Stack Overflow, I think, is like maybe the best example of that, but Menlo is another company that just sort of really pays attention to happiness and joy. I think a lot of times people feel like if you're having fun at work, it's not work, right? But I think that like we're undervaluing what those like genuine joy is trying to signal to our brains. And I think we should be paying a lot more attention to that. Also, like what is genuine anguish signaling to our brains? Like I think just because it's work doesn't mean that those emotions are no longer valid. We should be paying more attention to them. Not being controlled by them, but using them as data.